I never thought losing my wife would also mean losing my home. My name is Richard Coleman. I'm 70 years old, and until 2 years ago, I believed my family was strong enough to survive anything. My wife Eleanor and I spent 46 years building a quiet life together in the same house where we raised our daughter Vanessa. It was not a mansion or anything impressive, but every room carried memories of birthdays, holidays, and sacrifices that shaped our family. Eleanor used to say a home becomes valuable because of the people inside it, not because of the walls around it. After she died from cancer, I realized just how empty a house could feel without the person who made it alive. The months after her funeral were the darkest period of my life. I barely slept, barely ate, and spent most days sitting alone in silence, looking through old photographs. Vanessa started visiting more often during that time. At first, I thought she was simply worried about me. She brought groceries, helped organize paperwork, and kept telling me I should not live alone at my age. I trusted her completely because she was my only child. After losing Eleanor, Vanessa was the last family I had left in the world. A few weeks later, Vanessa suggested moving into the house temporarily with her husband, Brian, and their 2 children. She claimed it would help all of us emotionally and financially. The idea sounded reasonable at the time. I thought having family around might ease the loneliness, and I wanted my grandchildren to feel connected to the home Eleanor loved so much. Within days, boxes started filling the hallways. Furniture was rearranged, and suddenly the quiet house I once knew no longer felt like mine. At first, everything seemed normal, but slowly, small changes began appearing. Vanessa and Brian started making decisions without asking me. My favorite chair disappeared from the living room because it supposedly looked outdated. Eleanor's paintings were taken down and replaced with modern decorations. The kitchen was remodeled without my approval, and rooms inside the house started feeling unfamiliar. Every week, it became clearer that I was no longer treated like the owner of the home. I was treated like an unwanted guest living in the corner of someone else's life. Then came the night everything changed. I remember sitting quietly at the dinner table when Vanessa suddenly started talking about finances, property taxes, and the burden of taking care of me. Brian sat beside her nodding, silently while pretending to avoid eye contact. The conversation quickly turned cold. Vanessa explained that the house was too expensive to maintain and suggested selling it so they could move somewhere better suited for the family. When I refused, her entire attitude changed. The concern and kindness she once showed disappeared instantly, revealing something far uglier. Underneath, 3 days later, my daughter threw me out of my own home. She packed my belongings into a few old suitcases, placed them near the front door, and told me it would be best if I stayed somewhere else for a while. Standing there on the porch with my wife's photo album in my hands, I realized the truth. Eleanor had barely been gone 6 months, and already my own daughter was treating me like an obstacle standing between her and the life she wanted. I walked away from that house heartbroken, humiliated, and completely alone. But Vanessa had no idea what Eleanor secretly put into place before she died, and what happened next would change everything. The night my daughter forced me out of the house, I spent hours sitting alone at a small bus, stationed on the edge of town with 2 suitcases beside me. I remember staring at the rain falling onto the empty streets while trying to understand how my life had collapsed so quickly. 6 months earlier, I had been caring for my dying wife inside the home we built together. Now I was 70 years old with nowhere to go because my own daughter decided I was no longer useful. To her, the humiliation hurt more than the cold air around me. For the next few weeks, I stayed in a cheap motel using the little savings I still had left. Every morning felt heavier than the one before it. I kept replaying memories of Vanessa as a child in my mind, wondering where everything went wrong. Eleanor and I gave her everything we could during her childhood. We worked extra jobs, sacrificed vacations, and spent years making sure she had opportunities we never had ourselves. Yet the moment life became inconvenient, she treated me like unwanted furniture that could simply be removed from the house. What hurt even more was realizing how calculated the situation had become. Vanessa and Brian had slowly taken control of nearly everything after moving into the house. They handled mail, managed financial paperwork, and pushed me further into isolation while pretending they were helping. Looking back, I can now see the signs clearly. They were never trying to support me after Eleanor's death. They were positioning themselves to take over the property completely. One afternoon, while organizing old papers inside the motel room, I found something that changed everything. Hidden inside one of Eleanor's old folders was a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in her handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter Eleanor wrote shortly before she died. She explained that she had grown concerned about Vanessa and Brian's obsession with the house and money during her illness. Without telling anyone, Eleanor had updated important legal documents and placed ownership protections on the property before her death. According to the paperwork, the house could never legally be sold or transferred without my direct written approval and the involvement of a private family attorney named Harold Bennett. At that moment, I realized Vanessa had made a terrible mistake. The following morning, I contacted Harold Bennett and arranged a meeting at his office downtown. Harold already knew about Eleanor's concerns because she had prepared everything months earlier. He carefully reviewed the situation and immediately noticed several legal violations connected to Vanessa's actions. Utility accounts had been changed improperly, financial documents were manipulated, and there were signs that Brian attempted to pressure local officials regarding property ownership. The deeper Harold investigated, the clearer it became that Vanessa believed she already controlled the house completely. But legally, she controlled nothing. Harold then revealed something else Eleanor had secretly arranged before her death. A large investment account, worth nearly $2 million, had been placed into a protected trust connected to the property. Vanessa did not know the trust even existed because Eleanor intentionally kept it hidden. According to the terms, the money would only pass to Vanessa if she continued caring for me respectfully after Eleanor's death. Any evidence of neglect, manipulation, or abandonment would immediately remove her from receiving a single dollar. The moment Harold explained that, I finally understood why Eleanor looked so worried during her final weeks alive. She saw the greed in our daughter long before I did. After meeting Harold Bennett, everything that felt chaotic in my life started shifting into a clearer shape. The truth was no longer hidden behind grief or confusion. Vanessa had not just pushed me out of the house emotionally. She had been actively trying to take control of assets she believed were already hers. But Eleanor's legal safeguards meant her plan was far more fragile than she realized. The house, the account, and the trust were all structured in a way that required strict conditions she had already begun violating. Harold advised me not to confront Vanessa immediately. Instead, he began collecting evidence. Quietly, financial records were reviewed in detail. Property documents were traced back through every modification, and communication patterns between Vanessa and Brian were carefully documented. What emerged was a consistent pattern of pressure, manipulation, and gradual control. They had assumed I was too weak after Eleanor's death to challenge anything. That assumption became their biggest mistake. Meanwhile, I stayed at a small rented apartment provided temporarily through Harold's arrangements. The silence there felt different from the motel. It was not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of preparation. For the first time since being forced out, I was not reacting emotionally. I was observing. I started noticing how Vanessa avoided direct contact, unless it involved money or property discussions. Every call had the same tone, impatient, transactional, and increasingly frustrated that I had not simply disappeared from the situation. As the legal pressure built in the background, Vanessa and Brian began making errors. They attempted to list the house for consultation with real estate agents without proper authorization. They tried changing account access details that were already frozen under Eleanor's trust. Structure. Each action triggered alerts within the legal framework Harold had activated. Instead of gaining control, they were slowly documenting their own misconduct. Then came the turning point. Harold received confirmation that Vanessa had attempted to file partial ownership claims using falsified supporting documents. It was not enough to transfer ownership, but it was enough to prove intent, combined with witness statements from neighbors who noticed Brian handling paperwork without authorization. The case had moved from a family dispute into clear legal violation territory. At that stage, Harold prepared formal proceedings that would immediately freeze all attempts to sell or modify the property. When Vanessa learned that legal action had begun, her behavior changed completely. She stopped calling. Instead, Brian began sending messages that were no longer confident but defensive. The language shifted from control to panic. It became clear they were realizing the situation was no longer something they could manage through pressure or persuasion. During this time, I revisited Eleanor's letters several times. Each reading revealed a different layer of understanding. She had not only protected the house, she had also protected me. The trust conditions were not designed for wealth distribution alone. They were designed to measure character after her death. Eleanor had anticipated that grief sometimes reveals who people truly are, and she had prepared for the possibility that our daughter might choose greed over family. By the end of that week, Harold confirmed that Vanessa's access to all related financial and property channels had been suspended pending investigation. The situation had officially escalated beyond her control. For the first time since being thrown out, I was no longer the powerless one watching events unfold from the outside. The system was now moving in the opposite direction. The court hearing took place 3 weeks later, but by then the outcome had already begun, forming long before the judge entered the room. Harold had built a complete case supported by financial records, witness statements, and documentation from Eleanor's original trust structure. Vanessa arrived expecting a negotiation. Instead, she walked into a legal process that had already been prepared in detail. The evidence was presented step by step. Unauthorized changes to property-related accounts were displayed clearly. Attempts to list a house without proper consent were documented. Falsified paperwork submitted during ownership claims was exposed and verified by forensic review. Each layer of evidence reinforced the same conclusion. Vanessa had systematically tried to take control of the property while bypassing both legal and family-based restrictions set by Eleanor. When my turn came to speak, there was nothing dramatic in my words. I simply described what had happened after Eleanor's death, the loneliness, the trust, and the moment I was forced out of my own home. I did not need to exaggerate anything. The facts were already sufficient. Vanessa avoided eye contact throughout most of the proceedings. Brian remained silent, realizing too late that the structure they thought they had controlled was actually designed to hold them accountable. The final ruling confirmed what Eleanor had prepared years earlier. The house remained under my full legal protection, and all attempted transfers or claims by Vanessa were declared invalid. The trust funds were permanently frozen pending further legal review, with clear conditions that would permanently remove Vanessa from eligibility due to breach of trust obligations. In practical terms, the system Eleanor built had fully activated. After the hearing, Vanessa attempted to approach me outside the courthouse. There was no anger left at that point, only exhaustion. I looked at her and saw not a villain, but a consequence of choices that had already been made. I did not argue. I did not explain. I simply walked away. Some damage does not require further conversation to understand. In the weeks that followed, I returned to the house alone. It felt different than before, not because it had changed physically, but because its meaning had been clarified. It was no longer a place taken from me. It was a place preserved by someone who understood me better than anyone else. Eleanor had anticipated the fragility of family after loss, and she had ensured that greed would not be the deciding factor. Vanessa's life did not collapse in a dramatic way. Instead, she was forced to face consequences. she had avoided acknowledging. Financial restrictions limited her access to resources she expected control. Relationships built on expectation rather than respect began breaking apart. The illusion of easy success disappeared, replaced by accountability she could not bypass. I remained in the house afterward, not because I was holding on to the past, but because it was the only place that still reflected the life Eleanor and I had built together with honesty. The silence inside the home no longer felt empty. It felt final. What Vanessa never expected was simple. The person she underestimated most was not me. It was a woman who had already prepared for everything before she was gone.